This is my analysis of the Apple Keynote. I'm doing this before I read any other analyses documents or anything else on the web, so that this is really just my own thoughts rather than those of other publications and other places that have then been repackaged and rebranded. So I should start really with a caveat. This is what I use every day. I use an iPhone 5S and iPad, so I'm used to iOS, and I run a Mac Mini running Mavericks. But I also use Windows 7 and Windows 8.1. And as a C# developer, I use Visual Studio a lot for both C# and ASP.NET. Just like the Keynote was divided into three, my analysis is divided into three as well. The three main sections that I've put together for you are what was missing, what I feel is a bit of a catch-up, and what I feel is actually quite forward-thinking. So let's start with what was missing, and there are two very obvious items there. First of all, there's no Apple TV announcements, and secondly, the mythical iWatch didn't appear either. But that was really to be expected, because this isn't really a hardware event. It's designed as a developer event, so it's really looking at what software is going to be needed for the next year or so. Some people might think this might mean that there's going to be no App Store for Apple TV, and if there is an iWatch coming in the future, that there's going to be no third-party apps, because otherwise you'd have to announce these different platforms for making this all work. But actually that's not necessarily the case. Before I elaborate on that, let's go through some of the items that I feel that Apple are just really catching up with the competition on. First of all is obviously the iCloud Drive, which is basically catching up with Dropbox, SkyDrive as it was, OneDrive as it now is, Google Drive, Box, etc. The first thing to note really is how small the storage space is for free, just 5 GB, and that obviously I think includes all your backups and photos and everything like that as well. So it's not really that competitive really with what's going on in the marketplace at the moment. Another thing that struck me when I was watching the OS X part, the Yosemite, is how similar it actually is to Longhorn, which was the Microsoft operating system that never got launched. It was then replaced by Vista. I've put a couple of screenshots to show the similarities. You had a sidebar that was very similar to the sort of one that you ended up getting in Vista. Semi-transparencies, windows which are divided into two, very little chrome around the window, everything sort of very much focusing on the data rather than any sort of niceties, but there's a lot of similarities between these. Finally, we can get notifications where you can actually reply without actually leaving the application you're currently in, which obviously is something that you see quite a lot on Android-style devices. And a new SwiftKey style keyboard with some predictive messaging, texting, etc., which is quite interesting, but again is a bit more of a catch-up. I like the push-to-talk button and some of the chat features that go into iMessage, but again, these are really just sort of catching up with WhatsApp and Snapchat. Having the ability to have new keyboards is obviously a catch-up from Android as well, and I'm really looking forward to obviously getting a swipe-style keyboard on my phone when it's finally launched. Being able to communicate via your iPhone and your Mac together using AirPlay is obviously, also AirDrop, is obviously a useful feature as well, and one that's been sorely missed in previous years. Another notable mention, which I've not got a slide for on here, is widgets. One of the reasons for that, the widget implementation that they've chosen to use by putting it in Notification Center, which is the same on the Mac and on the iPhone device or iOS device, is quite a clever idea, and this is where I feel the software is going to be coming in for the iWatch. It's not obviously going to be a device that's standalone, it's going to be something that has to work with a phone or some sort of device, and it's very similar to what we're going to see in the Google Android Wear operating system. The same sorts of notifications that were going to appear in those widgets are the sorts of things that you're going to get on this sort of iPhone device. So without having to actually officially announce an iWatch or any device like that, they are actually putting the seeds in place for actually being able to do third-party programs for that device. So with that, let's move on to the forward thinking, and there are quite a lot of things that Apple are looking to do which are useful. Brett Victor, who now works for Dropbox, in 2012 came up with an idea that he called inventing on principle. He was talking about real-time programming, real-time coding. And what he came up with was basically, as you write code in one window, you can actually see the results straight away. So you can actually see what effect your code has on the program that you're running. Fast forward to the developer conference, and we see actually very similar sort of thing actually happening now with their Swift new programming language that they've generated. Swift is actually the one on the left, and on the right you can see, which looks very remarkably similar, is actually Brett Victor's work from that piece. So if you want to learn more about that, the best thing to actually do is search for Brett Victor Inventing on Principle on YouTube. It's about an hour long, but the technology being shown in there is really worth looking at. So Swift could well be a fantastic way of looking forward, removing a lot of the complexity in Objective-C and giving you real-time feedback over what you're actually doing. And obviously it compiles much faster as well than Objective-C, or runs much faster than Objective-C when compiled. Three other items that are really interesting. Metal, which is obviously the equivalent of DirectX on Windows, a way of trying to get out of having to use OpenGL, which has quite a thick library. It's quite buggy sometimes and can be quite slow on different devices. So getting closer to the actual hardware and therefore being able to produce much more complex graphics or more complex scenes in 3D is a really nifty little thing. Touch ID, obviously now being able to be used by third parties, is going to really expand a lot of things there with security. And this idea of having homes that can be controlled by devices, something that is coming out no matter what anyway. Having a sort of standardised system, even if it is within some sort of closed wall environment like Apple's going to produce, is quite a good step forward. On the developer side, the extensibility ideas are very welcome. Being able to add new functionality into the browser, for example, and being able to get communication going between applications, even if it is going to be limited application, is a really good thing. And the limits that they've put on iCloud usage by the developers with a petabyte of assets, 10 terabyte database, etc., is really, really good and a really effective system. It should keep people off Windows Azure and also the Amazon Cloud services when they're building software that works with Apple devices. I've shown the document page as well here, where you can actually input your own items through the extensibility. That's going to get very busy very quickly. That's the only worry that I have. So keeping track of that and keeping that sort of usable is going to be another challenge for Apple in the future. Finally, one of the most useful things I can see in my own life, but probably not for most people, is actually handoff. I can move quite often from working on a phone to an iPad to a Mac and vice versa. So much so that I've been looking to produce my own system for quite a while, which allows for this. And obviously Apple have now just gone ahead and built it and are baking it into their operating system. It's only going to work probably with very limited applications at first, because it will mean obviously that the programmers have to build this into their own applications, and it means building a separate Mac and iOS application for it to work. There are certainly some advantages to this system. Being able to answer your phone on your iPad up against your ear should lead to a few comedy moments, but that's about all that's going to be useful for. Having said that, I do use 2Go. I've got an O2 contract in the UK, so I get a program on my iPad which allows me to use my phone contract on my iPad as well as my phone. So I have used that in the past, and I think having that built into the operating system will actually be much better and will allow for much better synchronization of SMS. Other than that, I see this sort of idea of having the ability to move from one device to another and carry on with what you're doing constantly really, really useful. While there are lots of other things that I could talk about, these are the most important ones that I think need to be sort of analysed out in my head for what I want to do in the future. I like some of the things like the family sharing very much. That'd be very, very useful for me. But I wanted to finish on a comparison with where the two different behemoths of the industry, if you like, seem to be moving. And they're both, although they're not converging in exactly the same way, they've got this same idea of convergence with their different devices. Apple are looking at having a similar style on different devices, but not keeping the identical operating system, so that there's a familiarity there when you move from one device to another, but you're not limited by the UI that you're using. Microsoft have gone for this idea of having the same user interface everywhere that you go, so whatever device you use, eventually it will look exactly the same. This leads Apple on to having, although they've got a new programming language, you still have to build apps for either the Mac or for a mobile style device. You can have a universal iPhone, iPad app, or you could have one that just works on the iPhone or just on the iPad. But your Mac device has to be a totally separate application, even if you share libraries, as in code libraries in the background. Microsoft are trying to move very much to write once, use on any Microsoft device, a bit like the dream of Java. But it's becoming more and more of a reality in Microsoft's land. Obviously, they've got the Xbox in the living room, whereas Apple have Apple TV, and as yet, Apple TV hasn't been announced for anything specifically to do with software development. But whether that will build into some of these sort of more universal apps that we see on the mobile devices with this new Swift programming language or not, we'll wait and see. Handover, being able to swap from one device to another is very nice on the Mac, but you do have to obviously be in the whole Apple ecosystem, whereas Microsoft really use OneDrive as a synchronization tool, and there's no direct handover between devices. Finally, one big advantage Microsoft has, if you buy one of their products such as the Surface or Surface Pro, you get a free 200 gigabytes for 2 years of OneDrive space, so online storage isn't going to be a problem for you for quite a while. Whereas Apple are still looking at 5 gigabytes being your iCloud space, and that's about it. I know they're looking to have all the photos available on all your devices, so instant synchronization without having to worry about the photo stream style idea, but until they actually start giving away a lot more space on their cloud offerings, it's not going to work for most people. And that's about it for my very quick analysis, very rapid go through. I'm sure there's a lot more I could say, but that's where I'm going to finish up with today. Thank you for watching.